Hello, this is Assaf Nahoom, and this is my final essay for modern Hebrew literature. The two presentations I have selected are Disabled Veterans in Hebrew Fiction by Umanga and Shidatana, and The Representation of Israeli-Palestinian Conflict in Modern Hebrew Literature by Ayodeji Adesina. The presentation Disabled Veterans in Hebrew Fiction by Umanga and Shidatana is a magnificent presentation highlighting the representation of veterans in modern Hebrew literature and expands on how literature reflects in trauma, identity, and reintegration. Using incredible authors' work like Meir Shalev and Ron Leshem, just to name a few, patterns in Hebrew fiction, and literary implications, they bring to us, the readers, the pain, the suffering, the overcoming, and the recovery of the disabled war veterans of Israel in modern Hebrew literature. They bring us the stories that yearn to be heard from the people who put their lives on the line for a whole country and paid a heavy price. The second presentation I'll be talking about in this essay is of course the great presentation by Ayodeji about the representation of Israeli-Palestinian conflict in modern Hebrew literature. Ayodeji's presentation brings to the table the long and miserable Israeli-Palestinian conflict by using many books like The Gun and the Olive Branch by David Hurst and I Saw Ramallah by Murid Barghouti, pictures of the destruction and the suffering, literary techniques and symbolism, challenges and controversies, and many more tools to demonstrate the main narrative of how awful the conflict is for both sides. The two presentations are both wonderful, meaningful, and important, with a main connection of sharing how horrible wars are. The ongoing Israeli-Palestinian wars and clashes through the years from one side, and all of Israel's many wars through the years with the Palestinians, but also the neighboring Arab countries. Another connection between the two is the sympathy to the dead and the injured, resulting in these poor people and their families struggling so much. This topic of disabled veterans and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are so closely related by one being a direct derivative of the other. Many disabled Israeli veterans are a direct result of the conflict that has been going for about 100 years. In addition to that, one of the reasons that the conflict is still so massive and relevant is the effects of disabled veterans from both sides who seek revenge and have hate in their heart for the other side for what they have done to them, or their families, or their friends and comrades. The fuel they give is well reflected in modern Hebrew literature and fiction with books like Trauma in Beaufort by Ron Leshem, who describes the situation with a powerful quote, "We came back but not all of us returned," which shows the national trauma the nation is in since serving is mandatory. The presenters present the themes in quite different ways. Umanga and Shidatana chose to present with more of a scholar approach to a topic so heart-touching and did a great job bringing many professional sources and authors. They also spoke very respectfully and added many facts from the research they have done. However, they chose to address the theme using fiction books and not one based on true stories, even though the authors are disabled veterans and have books about the wars they have experienced themselves. From the complete opposite way, Ayodeji brings autobiographies and true stories from people who have experienced the conflict and its complications and misery with their own eyes. An example for this is Edgar Keret, whom we've learned about in this class, and is a well-respected author who has experience with the conflict, who has experience with the conflict and very strong opinions about it too. Although he is presenting many books about the topics, Ayodeji focuses more on the personal aspect of the literature with caricatures, emotional pictures, and books which are mostly personal experience with bias. The thing the presenters did the most like each other is making sure they give authors who are saying no to wars and no to hate, without including those who do not hold the same opinions about the matters they have presented. Now, why is service in Israel mandatory? Service in Israel is mandatory because of the many enemies Israel is surrounded by geographically and the constant danger the country is in. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Qatar, and many more all are or have been direct enemies of the small nation of Israel. With so many enemies and such a small country, with a population that had never exceeded 10 million people, compared to the hundreds of millions the enemies have combined, the country would just simply not survive if not everyone would serve. As the former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once said, if the if the Arabs lay down their weapons, the war will end. If the state of Israel lays down its weapons, the state of Israel will cease to exist. Israel must have mandatory service, or else it will simply cease to exist. How do veterans of the enemy armies feel the same as the Israeli authors? Most of them feel the same as the Israeli authors. Despite being in the army and getting injured, they advocate for peace, understanding, and dialogue between the sides. An example for one is Yusuf Bashir, who was shot by an Israeli soldier resulting in a spinal injury. His book, The Words of My Father, Love and Pain in Palestine, speaks about his recovery and his journey towards peace. It is a testament of forgiveness, resilience, and understanding those who are different from you. After more research, my conclusion is that disabled Arab veterans are like Israeli ones, and focus in their stories and books on the way for peace and dialogue. What leads me to my next question of, what is the future for the veterans? What is the next step in trying to get the pain to stop? The answer lies deeper than one would have thought. The next step for the disabled veteran authors is to focus on working together rather than everyone on their own. While they all have their unique stories and experiences, if the public, those who are unaware of the pain and suffering, don't see that both sides are in agreement about the way the conflict and the hate should be handled, with love and understanding of all other, will keep thinking that the other side is the devil and peace will never be reached. According to the very accomplished Palestinian diplomat Gaith al-Omari, peace will only come when both sides understand the other side is not the devil, but human beings just like them. The next step is working together despite the differences, because in the end they all want the suffering and pain to end. My questions for Ayodhya is, you have included a book named Hamas Contained, a book that speaks about the rise of Hamas to power. Why would you add a book that strongly supports the terrorist group? A reason for the book Hamas Contained to be in the presentation according to ideology is to show the Palestinian side of the conflict in modern Hebrew literature. However, this book is not Hebrew or Jewish literature at all. The book was written by Tariq Bakuni, Palestinian author who despises Israel and its actions in Gaza. The book clearly refuses to acknowledge Hamas as a terrorist organization and supports its actions through the years, calling its resilience even when Israeli and non-Israeli civilians are being murdered because of their actions. The reason the book was included in the presentation, and especially under themes and perspectives in modern Hebrew literature, must be lack of research about the book and lack of understanding of what modern Hebrew literature is. A book like this is not an example of modern Hebrew literature. What about the Intifadas? Two events that shaped the conflict the most between 1980 and 2005. The Intifadas are forgettable for foreigners since they did not experience it firsthand, did not lose anyone they knew or their family knew, and they do not count the Intifadas as wars, just as uprisings. Yet, their impact was monumental to the Israeli and Palestinian societies. Thousands of lives were lost, and people were scared to go out and live their lives from the fear of getting murdered in broad daylight. Most middle-aged Israeli authors grew up with at least one of the Intifadas, directly affecting them as the whole country was in shock and pain. As Ner David, a rabbi, writer, and a mother of 7, describes the scene, but the scenes of Jewish and Arab neighbors brawling in the streets, setting fires to businesses and cars, and vandalizing homes, synagogues, and Muslim cemeteries were especially jarring to those trying to create a more integrated and fair society. The Intifada was a horrible but important part of the conflict, and that must be spoken about when addressing the conflict. The most important event in the conflict in years happened recently. What will be the impact of it on modern Hebrew literature? October 7th is the happiest day for the Palestinians in years, and the most horrible day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. On that day of murder, Palestinians were overjoyed with the Al-Aqsa flood operation, according to the Middle East Media Research Institute, while Israelis are still mourning over the event and will continue to do so for decades to come. In relation to modern Hebrew literature, this massacre will fuel many young authors to write and discuss about their loss and traumas for many years. Pain and suffering will motivate authors from both sides to write about their way of solving the conflict and the endless wars that have been going on. With hope that the hate will stop and the sides realize that there is always hope for peace. Why are veterans so passionate about peace? Wouldn't it make more sense for them to have hate in their heart? The question is deep in the topic Umanga and Shida Tanak chose for their presentation. They spoke about the actions and relevance, but the why is going a level deeper. Why? Why don't they have hate in their heart? The reason for this is their own suffering. Disabled veterans, for the most part, are the ones who understand the horrors and atrocities of war the most. Organizations like Combats for Peace and Veterans for Peace are very active for peace, as they have held many protests against the current war and previous ones, and are constantly holding events with speakers and survivors, and are constantly raising and donating money to the cause of peace. In the presentation about the conflict, there is lack of representation of modern Hebrew literature from the right wing in Israel. Who are some right-wing Israeli authors who wrote about the conflict? When discussing the conflict, many non-Israeli and non-Palestinian people tend to not speak about the side that is not advocating for peace and actually hate the enemies, sometimes more than they love their fellows. An example for this kind of people is the infamous Meir Kahane. Kahane was an Israeli-American extremist who might have hated the Palestinians more than anyone ever. Kahane was not only a terrorist that was arrested more than 60 times, but also an author. In his book They Must Go, The Jewish Idea, which got him banned from several countries like the UK for its extreme calls for hate and violence, he says, "We will not come to the Arabs to request, argue, or convince," says Kahane. "For Jews and Arabs in Israel there is only one answer: separations. Jews in their land, Arabs in theirs. Separation, only separation." This sentence, while being extreme exists and has many who believe in this, even if they do not believe in everything he says. Like him, there are other authors who write with the idea of separation. Authors like Caroline Glick with her book The Israeli Solution, a one-step plan for peace in the Middle East, and Moshe Feiglin with his book Where There Are No Men. How do the State of Israel support these disabled veterans? Nearly all of Israel's disabled veterans are supported by the state, either physically, mentally, financially, or all three. The state and its citizens deeply care about the disabled veterans, as they are considered to be heroes and are well respected in Israeli society. Israel has many organizations and government-funded programs for disabled veterans. Organizations like Tzahal Disabled Veterans Fund, which provides help for more than 3,400 disabled veterans. Some of the help offered is financial support, monthly activities, and constant mental support. Another organization is Beit HaLochem, which does very similar stuff. Kol Zchut, which is a funded support program by the Rehabilitation Division of the Ministry of Defense, gives benefits, payments, and treatments in various areas such as health, psychological support, coping with post-trauma, financial and professional assistance, housing, studies, and etc. The State of Israel supports its disabled veterans heavily, as they are appreciated by all and are loved and supported. What is the possibility a two-state solution will happen in the near future? As the longest war in Israel's history is going on right now, and thousands of casualties from both sides, it is highly unlikely a two-state solution will happen in the near future. Before the cold trust the Israeli people and government had in Palestinians was shattered on the worst day in the country's history, October 7. Many Israelis believed this was a possibility. However, as mentioned, that trust does no longer exist. An example for this is the Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's call for a Palestinian village to be erased.